Greetings, Miss Hart, and whoever else may be watching this. Today I'm going to be discussing Marxist theory, Marxist literary criticism, and presenting a brief analysis of various texts that I have read throughout my time at Royal St. George's College through this lens. So first off, what is Marxism? Marxism is a theory of socioeconomic analysis developed mainly by 19th century philosopher and economist Karl Marx, as well as his collaborator Friedrich Engels. Marxism is largely based upon Marx's theory of history, dialectical materialism, which argues that the course of history is driven by the material conditions of societies, specifically the conflict between hierarchical classes, mainly the proletariat or the working class, who do not own the means of production, and therefore their labor is exploited by the bourgeoisie, the upper class who own the means of production and exploit the proletariat. Marx believed that the conditions set in place by the proliferation of capitalism around the world would eventually lead to a proletarian revolution against the bourgeoisie, resulting in the development of communism, a stateless, classless society. Therefore, Marxist literary criticism examines a text through this materialist lens, discussing the influence of material conditions upon various aspects of the text. So firstly, we're going to be discussing John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, which is a novel whose plot revolves entirely around the struggles faced by the proletariat, with the story being based upon real-life struggles faced by working-class Americans during the Great Depression. All of the book's major characters belong to the working class and live lives of hardship and misfortune due to this fact. The struggles that George and Lenny experience are largely due to their class, as they are both forced to work so that they can survive, and George does not have the money to ensure the safety of Lenny and the people around him, so he is forced to look after Lenny himself, leading to various misfortunes throughout the book. Secondly, we have 1984 by George Orwell. Now, when analyzing literature through a Marxist lens, it is understood that literature directly reflects the social and material conditions from which it originates, and therefore the context of a text's creation is important to understanding it. George Orwell's novel, 1984, released in 1949, reflects fears that would have been commonplace at the time of its writing, such as the rise of the totalitarian Soviet Union and the still recent memory of Nazi Germany. This influence manifests in many ways throughout the novel, most notably in the aesthetics of its world, with the mustache-wearing face of Big Brother taking clear inspiration from the images of Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler, and the Party of Oceania bearing resemblance both to the Soviet Union's Communist Party and the Third Reich's Nazi Party. In the world of 1984, workers are not oppressed by a capitalist system like the one Marx criticized, but instead by a different totalitarian system in which the proles, the working class of the society, and lower-level party members who occupy a sort of middle-class space in Oceania. Both of these groups alike are indoctrinated into uncritically supporting the party through the use of propaganda, effectively making it impossible for them to achieve any sort of class consciousness and move towards a worker-run communist society. The novel clearly reflects Orwell's opinions on these authoritarian states and his fears that totalitarianism may eventually become the main mode of organization politically throughout the world, creating a dystopian future like the one in the novel. And finally, we're going to be talking about the main event, Frankenstein. Frankenstein was published by Mary Shelley in 1818, following various revolutions around the world, including the French, American, and Haitian revolutions, which, combined with the radical politics of Shelley's parents and husband, likely influenced the novel's themes. Dr. Victor Frankenstein, a character whose worldview is undoubtedly shaped by his wealthy, privileged background, represents the bourgeoisie. Frankenstein is responsible for the monster's creation and thus the subjugation inherent to its unnatural life. And therefore the monster, who acts violently out of a desire for revenge for his abandonment by Frankenstein, and the unfair treatment that he receives due to his grotesque appearance, represents the proletariat. The monster's violent, destructive behavior can be seen to represent the attempt at a proletarian revolution against the bourgeoisie. So the narrative framing of this struggle, which is fairly sympathetic to the monster, but nonetheless emphasizes its violence and destruction, is likely influenced by general societal attitudes during the time the book was written, in which people were fearful of the violence that they had heard or seen took place in these historical revolutions. And here we have two quotes from Frankenstein, both of which I believe to be relevant to a Marxist analysis of the text. First, we have a quote from the monster from chapter 10, which reads, "Remember, thou hast made me more powerful than thyself. My height is superior to thine, my joints more supple, but I will not be tempted to set myself in opposition to thee. I am thy creature, and I will be even mild and docile to my natural lord and king, if thou wilt also perform thy part, the which thou owest me." Firstly, the monster's physical advantage over Frankenstein can be seen to represent the fact that the proletariat is much larger in numbers than the bourgeoisie. But this quote represents the state of a proletariat class which has not yet achieved class consciousness, and therefore is unable to revolt. Class consciousness is the concept of a collective understanding by the proletariat of their exploitation, not just on an individual level, but as an entire class. Before the proletariat has achieved class consciousness, members of the proletariat class may individually understand that they are being exploited in one way or another, but they do not understand the systemic basis of their exploitation, which is firmly rooted in class. Here, the monster does not want to revolt against Frankenstein because he holds the false belief that Frankenstein has the monster's best interests in mind and will look out for him. Marx believed that the collective understanding of class consciousness was critical to inciting a revolution, and it can be seen here that the monster's false belief in Frankenstein, or in other words, the proletariat's false hope for the capitalist system in which they live, are stopping them from beginning a revolution. This second quote also comes from the monster from chapter 24. The quote reads, "That is also my victim. In his murder my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. O Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovedst. Alas, he is cold. He cannot answer me." This quote can be seen to reflect skeptical attitudes towards revolution, based on the idea that it is unlikely that the utopian societies envisioned by revolutionaries will actually be realized, and that revolution will often simply lead to misfortune. Though the monster did not specifically kill Frankenstein, he wreaked havoc around him, and the conditions set in place by the creation of the monster eventually led to Frankenstein's death. Even though Frankenstein was solely responsible for the misfortune and suffering that defined the monster's life, the monster nonetheless laments his death, similarly to the idea posed by anti-revolutionaries of Shelley's time and later anti-communists, that a post-revolution society will eventually fall victim to the same or worse hardships than the society that preceded it, and that revolution itself can be largely misguided. And so concludes my presentation on Marxist theory. I hope you found it interesting. And Miss Hart, I really just want to thank you for everything you've taught me this year. I really had a great time in class, especially during the period of one-on-one classes. That was really, really fun. So thanks for everything, and I hope you have a great summer.